Hi, everybody, and welcome to Occupational Therapy 212, Occupation Through the Lifespan. My name is Melissa Kay, and I'll be your instructor. Today's lecture is on young adults, and this original presentation was created by Carly Kruger, Annie Duong, Markela Cozzoli, Krista Kahn, and Ryan McBride, and I have since revised it. But thank you, debt of gratitude to my students from 2020. All right, so let's get started. We have three objectives today. The first is to describe the various theories and theorists that help us define and contextualize young adulthood. The second is to review the development of young adults across a variety of domains. And the third is to discuss how disability and other issues might affect development and occupational engagement in young adults. So starting with our theory. We have three theorists, and by this point, they're probably familiar to you. We have followed them throughout a number of our presentations, starting with early childhood. So first off, we have Jean Piaget, and the stage that is characterized in young adulthood, which, by the way, is from 21 to 34 years of age. So again, 21 to 34. Is the formal operations stage. It is characterized by symbolic thought and representation, and it's most prevalent when individuals have been exposed to cognitive challenges. So Piaget is all about cognitive development. It makes sense that if one is challenged cognitively, they will go into this formal operations stage. The idea of symbols is a sophisticated, more intellectual pursuit, and it requires higher level cognitive functioning. So that's what kind of marks this phase of development. However, as I've said before, not everyone goes into the formal operation stage, and not everyone stays there. So sometimes we're in pre-operational, sometimes we're in formal operations. So it is a bit fluid. Erikson is our second theorist of the day, and as you know, we've been following Erikson's stages of development throughout the lifespan, and this one is intimacy versus isolation. So there is a conflict, right? And each stage has a conflict, and then if the individual is successful in developing, they get a resolution. So the intimacy is, comes from adolescence and developing peer relationships, developing intimate relationships, exploring and becoming a sexual human, and having relationships with friends, families, significant others, etc. And the battle is this possible tendency to remain isolated or to fail to develop meaningful relationships. So we've kind of ramped up through middle childhood and into adolescence in terms of finding people who are of like mind and spirit, and becoming close and intimate with them. And the lack of resolution in this phase is a sense of isolation. And we know that, that there's adults who are very isolated and very alone and very lonely. And so this is a danger for our young adults, is to not feel like they fit anywhere. I was going to say fit in, but I don't think it's fitting in. I think it's more about finding a fit with your people, whether they're family and biologically related or a family of choice. And then finally, Freud, in his psychosexual phases, or stages rather, we are still, as with adolescence, in the genital stage. It's his last stage, and it persists throughout adulthood. What we do with that, Freud was a brilliant psychoanalyst, but many people feel like his work is a bit outdated. So we take it with a grain of salt, but definitely, sex and sexual intimacy are drivers for many people. So we'll leave it at that. All right. Not sure what happened there. Had a little PowerPoint glitch. So it bears mentioning at this point that the organizing slide for this slide deck is this image. And if you are studying at a later date, or you're looking for a particular part of the presentation, look to see this full page color image, and it will kind of guide you and act as a little bit of a navigation tool throughout the slide deck. Also bears mentioning, as I have before, that the presenter notes have a lot of very useful information in them, and the slide decks are available for download. So please take advantage of that. Use it for your review and for your study. All right, so let's dive right in. Our first topic is body functions and structures. We have two different aspects that we're going to look at right now. The first is brain and nervous system development, and the second is sensory functions. So my assumption, maybe a little bit faulty, is that most all of you, if not all of you, are actually in this young adult phase. And so I would ask you to look to yourselves and self-reference as we go through this lecture, because you're actually living it, right? So your experience, while not typical of everyone in young adulthood, definitely will give you kind of a grounding or a rooting on which to develop further knowledge about this stage of development. So, brain and nervous system. Early adulthood sees the nervous system functioning at peak performance. We have matured and we have arrived. And so what that means is the prefrontal cortex is fully matured, the brain is fully developed at around 25 years old, and there's evidence that neurogenesis, where new nerve cells are generated, continues in adult brains, especially in the lateral ventricles and the hippocampus. So we're still developing new nerve cells, and the mature prefrontal cortex means that there's less risky behavior than there is in adolescence. If you remember, we had the striatal system and some lack of ability to act from a future-oriented temporal kind of context. And so in the young adult, we're coming back to more of some homeostasis, and some of that risk-taking behavior and that lack of forward-looking and future focus has dropped away with young adulthood. The less plasticity in the brain means that it's going to become more difficult to pick up skills, but it's still possible. And from what we know about our neurology, we are able to actually learn new skills throughout the lifespan. Plasticity, yes, is somewhat reduced. However, the brain is able to grow new connections throughout the lifespan. So, sensory functions. Sensory acuity is also at a peak level. Our seeing, our hearing, our vestibular systems, our proprioceptive system, our sense of touch, both protective and discriminative, all of our systems are in top-notch shape. Now, our sensory functions support memory functions. So we've been talking about this for a little while too, at least since middle childhood. And our sensory input, so visual input, auditory input, even tactile and kinesthetic input, then contributes to our ability to remember new information and then to recall it. So it comes in through our senses, and we capture it and store it. And young adults are especially able to do that. Continuing with body functions and structures, we next have our cognitive functions. So young adults are able to consider multiple POVs, or points of view. So throughout childhood, we have individuals who are pretty much self-centered. And again, that's not in a bad or pejorative way, but they're focused on the self. And in young adulthood, we become so much more able to empathize and to look at other people's points of view. Researchers from UC Davis, would call this the theory of mind, the ability to get into somebody else's probable situation or brain and imagine what the world is like from their point of view. We also are achieving, responsible, and executive, and in that phase of development. And you can probably see that, right? You're in a master's program. You have to be responsible in order to balance your many kind of competing priorities. And this executive stage of functioning means that organization, problem solving, sequencing, management of a bunch of different stuff is all really happening for you. Now, COVID and the pandemic and the stay at home and all of that definitely disrupted that for a lot of young adults. However, rest assured that you still have that resilience and you still have that ability to really step into those kinds of roles. I also want to talk about crystallized intelligence versus fluid intelligence, and these are terms that you will want to make note of. So fluid intelligence is the ability to logically problem solve, and it peaks in early adulthood at about 30 years of age and then slowly declines. So it's our technical, logical, rational brain grabbing onto problems and making sense of them, right? And let's contrast that with crystallized intelligence, which is knowledge gained through experiences, and it, conversely, increases with age. So we have this fluid intelligence of like grabbing on and manipulating and moving a problem around and figuring it out, as opposed to the crystallized intelligence, which is more about, oh, I have this experience and I can make use of it further on in my life. And in fact, I can make use of earlier experiences throughout my life. So pretty interesting. Let's see. There's more information in the presenter notes about achieving responsible and executive stage. I'll let you review that on your own, but let's turn to stress and coping at this point. So there's many new environments that a young adult faces: college, higher ed, moving out of parents' home into your own home, becoming partnered, possibly having children. And so the whole domestic situation of that, moving out into new friend groups. So there's many, many new environments that a young adult will confront. And these are important stressors. Now, again, stress can be either a good, productive thing, or if it goes into distress or high levels of stress, it can actually be something that is very maladaptive and damaging to a person. So the young adult will experience emotional stress, psychological stress, or physical stress, and it just means that something is disrupting the daily routine or occupations. Coping is a stress response that includes the effort to solve the problem and overcome the stress. So young adults are increasing their ability to cope, and they're broadening and learning new coping mechanisms. If there was an unstable environment or hardship during youth, young adults may not have strong coping skills, but resilience can play a role, and coping skills can be taught. Higher level reasoning and mature cognition helps to gain coping skills, right? So if we're using our problem solving, it doesn't exactly like take away emotional stress, but we can find ways to manage it. Mindfulness, breathing, visualization, taking a hot bath, all of these strategies that we use to deal with stress. So we can take what we know intellectually and apply it to emotional and psychological and even physical stress. This will probably date the video, but the Olympics are going on right now, and Simone Biles, world-class American gymnast, and who's breaking all kinds of records with the difficulty of her routines and her maneuvers, and a lot of people are saying she's the best gymnast ever in the history of gymnastics. She just bowed out of the team finals all arounds and the individual all arounds, citing mental stress. So here's a young adult who's at the very, very peak of her physical and sensory and and even cognitive ability, but the stress, for whatever reason, and of course we don't know, and it's none of our business, but that stress has built up to a point where she couldn't persist, which is super sad, but understandable in a way. Anyway, okay, so stress and coping, it requires strategy development. And health, stressing, and coping are all interconnected, right? So we have our brain-body connection. We have stress just from the world and possibly internally and possibly from occupations. But coping strategies can help maintain health. And we don't want to overlook stress as an important factor in our ideas of health and dis-ease. All right. So more physical functions. Or actually, this is our first physical function slide. Young adults are attaining their maximal growth of skeletal, respiratory, and cardiovascular systems. Makes sense if you're at your physical peak, right? Cardiovascular fitness is never been stronger. Young adults are testing boundaries with risky choices. Now, I just said, adolescents are all about risky behavior. Young adults as well. It's like, okay, I'm super strong and I got it all together. I'm going to see how far I can push it. So it's got a little bit of a different flavor, but definitely making unhealthy choices or testing boundaries is something that happens. It includes drug and alcohol use, of course, as well as seeing how much stress can I take, possibly getting less sleep, especially students, they're burning the candle at both ends, so to speak, and making unhealthy food choices. So at this point in one's life, also, gastrointestinal function is working and metabolism is working at a good clip. And so if you want to overeat or you want to make bad choices, you don't have typically a lot of repercussions. As a middle-aged adult, I can tell you that those come later and those choices stop being viable. But we'll wait till middle adulthood to talk about that. All right. So young adults, in addition to testing boundaries with risky choices, also are developing healthy habits and routines like working out, doing yoga, meditating, etc. So there's things happening on both ends of that continuum. Risk factors for young adults include lifestyle choices, for example, drugs and alcohol, amongst other things, motor vehicle accidents, and suicide, which are the leading causes of death for young adults. And motor vehicle accidents could be caused by drunk driving or risky driving, like speeding or racing. Possibly not obviously. Mental health issues are definitely in the picture for young adults as well, and unfortunately leading to suicide rates going up. Obesity is a chronic condition that's caused by genetic, biological, psychological, social, lifestyle, and dietary factors. So I really want you to internalize that it's not just caused by eating too much, right? There's this constellation of factors that cause one to become obese, which is well above the weight that is healthy for one's height. And the issue has just as much relevance for young adults as for adolescents. It can lead to poor body image and low quality of life. It also affects more women than men. And I would also say, that there's a movement called Healthy at Any Size, which is looking at how much is being quote unquote overweight really the problem versus how much a person is able to be active and to engage in all the occupations in which they want to engage, and also avoid health-related concerns that are associated with obesity. So we're kind of looking at, what does that mean? Is it just like, okay, you're overweight and that's it? Or can you be a larger person and be healthy? And the research is saying, yes, in fact, you can be a larger person and be healthy. But we also have this, boy, I'm on my little soapbox. I'll step down in 1 second. So we also have this thing of like the media and social media in particular giving us messages about what we should look like and what's acceptable. So for both adolescents and young adults, and disproportionately women over men, we do have this struggle with health and body weight and body mass index and all of that. So important to keep in mind. So finally, stepping down off the soapbox, lack of consistent healthcare is another risk factor. Now, this may be due to lack of health insurance that's supplied by an employer, someone who's still in school or job searching, or you're still young enough that you don't really think insurance is all that important because you're super healthy. So a variety of reasons why there wouldn't be consistent healthcare, and it presents a risk factor to young adults. Thanks for bearing with me with that last.